Also kind of feels like there's a filter over your camera.
It does. It's called being not a very good camera. That's the filter. It's like when you have a cheap microphone. It sounds like everyone's talking like this. So yeah, it's not the best. But what's good about it is that because it's not that HD, when I speak to people over Zoom and stuff, it's quite good quality. Because it's actually not great quality, but because the size of the video files is so much lower than a HD camera, my internet connection is better.
Nice.
So it's not such a drain. Although my internet's fine now. But that is a random little... I think it's called a soft intro, I think it's called, with podcasting, where you just press record and go straight into it. So I am here today with my friend Matt. And we've got a new kind of mini-series that we're testing out. If Matt passes this, then this is the pilot. If Matt does well enough, then we'll go on to other ones. But it's going to be called Hot Takes. And one of the reasons for that is because although Matt and I are friends, and we've been friends through work for about a year now,
Year and a half, yeah.
Yeah, because of that, we disagree politically on almost everything. Like, in the more specific details of things, the general ideas we have of how society should be in general ways is largely the same. We want people to be happy, all that kind of stuff, freedom. But, like, the ways we go about thinking those things is different. And so I always have interesting conversations with you. And you're educated with your views, whereas I just kind of float through lots of different ones. So before we get into any of those, we've got one planned for a little bit later, Elon Musk. But before we delve into that, I want to know who you are. I mean, I know who you are, but the audience to know. Probably when hearing you say more than a full sentence, they'll maybe notice that your accent does not match mine. Yeah. So how would you identify?
How do I identify?
Who are you?
Yes.
Who are you?
So I'm from Australia. Grew up in Australia, western suburbs outside of the city. Till I was about 18, 19. Then started to get a job in the city. Spent 2 or 3 years in the city and then decided I wanted to do some traveling. Went to America, did a hike. That was about 1,200 miles over 3 months, which was quite cool.
A 3-month hike.
Yeah. There's some stories there, that's for sure.
I've heard a couple of them.
So that was a lot of fun. Went with a best mate, which was cool. How else... What am I trying to say here?
When did you get to the commune part? Like, I've got anchor points of your life, of like where you've lived and what you've done.
The highlights, yeah. Basically, Australia till about 18, did some traveling. Thailand was my first overseas trip. Did 3 days there. America was 3 months. That was the hiking. And then after the hiking, I hitchhiked from Vancouver all the way down to Georgia and then Florida. And then flew from Florida to Switzerland, and that was the Hippie Commune, or the Sufi camp, which was...
How long were you there for?
3 months.
Another 3 months.
Yeah, considerable amount of time.
Two very different things. One is hiking, which is pure purpose-driven, going in that one direction, and then a commune kind of thing, which is... Well, I keep calling it a commune to pull your leg, but that kind of thing, which is like everything is all around us and sufficient. It's kind of two very opposite ways of living in nature, in air quotes.
Definitely. The commune was definitely an eye-opener. It was a camp. People I'm not used to being around.
Yeah.
When I went there, it was when... So Cody, my mate, introduced me to the idea of spending the time in Switzerland. Switzerland's a good place to go. It's super expensive. So he sold it to me as free accommodation. You get physical labor, so you're doing something, which is good. And then you get free time. And so you can go do your traveling. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm in. And then when I got there, so I was very turned my nose up to the whole Gaia and the different spirits and free love and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then, it was just kind of like, when am I ever going to get this experience again in my life? When am I going to have the opportunity? Regardless of my thoughts and opinions, let's go for it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Did you originally plan to go there for 3 months?
Originally, no. That was very Cody was very methodical in his plan and bringing me to his side to end up spending that time. I'm very grateful for him for introducing me to it because it was quite cool. And out of all the people there, at least 50% of them I'm still in contact with today.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a global community, which is quite cool because then you end up with ties to different countries everywhere. And then when you go travel, you have people to see, things to do.
Yeah.
And just also gives you access to the rest of the world, which is quite nice.
Yeah, well, that's what you want, isn't it? It's because whenever I've gone travelling, you want to experience cultures, new experiences, and a lot of time meet the people. You know, even if it's just an Italian baker, you know, you go to like their patisserie and just see some of their things, and you know, anything like that. Just any kind of people that have different experiences. Like Megan is obviously very well travelled, so she's got people dotted all over the globe as well. And from podcasting, which is literally the opposite of travelling, I've got quite a few friends from across the globe as well. And it's one of the reasons I want to talk to you as well, because you're from across the globe. From us to you is one of the furthest away points on Earth.
Yeah.
So you were in the hippie commune stuff. Then where'd you go from there? Because you eventually ended up here in my house.
Yeah. So I did my traveling, spent nearly a year away, and then decided to come home. And it's like, okay, cool. Let's go down the normal route, find a partner, settle down, have a family, get myself set up. I was definitely shot myself in both feet by doing the traveling, but then traveling also has its own benefits.
Yeah.
So,
less quantifiable ones.
Yeah. So I had to kind of hit the ground running, get myself the car organized, get all the assets, the furniture, find a place to live. So it was kind of like building myself up from the start again.
Yeah.
I was on that path. It's doing well. And I had a normal insurance job for a bank, and career-wise, I landed pretty much the job I wanted to stay at, and I was set and saving to kind of, you know, achieve the elusive house deposit and partner. And then I met Alice in Sydney. So we were on a annual sort of like celebration at work, and we're in a pub. Had a friend there who was way too drunk, which I was kind of chaperoning. I was just trying to like, hey, Sasha, keep it together. You know, 30 seconds, we can get in the door. This is a sixth pub we've been turned away from. Like, just kind of take a couple breaths and then hold on and we'll make it past. And eventually, we managed to get into the only pub left open about 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And just had fun, a couple drinks. And Sasha started a very inappropriate conversation with no volume control. Okay. So it wasn't just a discussion between me and Sasha. It was Sasha, me, and the entire bar. And somehow it got onto bondage and how she assumed that I would enjoy being tied up.
Right.
And so wanted to let the whole bar know that I was into a little bit of light BDSM.
Right.
And then that noise and the show Sasha was putting on kind of drew Alice's attention.
I see.
And Alice was behind me. I hadn't even clocked her at all. And then Sasha just kind of walked straight past me. And the first introduction was, oh, hi, I'm Sasha. This is Matt. This guy likes being tied up. Do you like being tied up? And that was the introduction. It wasn't like, hi, this is Matt. What's your name? Nothing. It's just straight into it.
Nice.
And Alice had a good sense of humor about it. Mm-hmm. And we ended up getting along. Traded stories. I had my hike. She had her sailing because she's a sailor.
Yep.
And we gave it a shot for 2 or 3 weeks, kind of played house, decided we wanted to do it for real.
Because she's from the UK, isn't she?
She's from the UK, yes.
She's not from far from here, is she? Like, as in her family?
Tunbridge Wells, yeah. So about 2 hours north.
Yeah, which, you know, especially in England, it sounds like, to English people, that sounds like far, but to anyone else in the world, they're like, that's no distance at all. 2 hours, make there and back in a day. Yeah, exactly. Back home in Australia, it's a 2-hour drive to the beach. So, yeah, it's not far at all. That's a day trip. Yeah. So met Alice, still have the intention of settling down, getting a house deposit, getting my life together. So I get this curveball. It was pretty much the best date I'd been on ever. We got along really well. We both had interesting stories. We had kind of gone out to kind of experience the world and come back. And she had done 2 years in Australia and she was doing her third year while studying. And so visa-wise, it was like, okay, if we're going to give this a proper shot, we have to go for the citizenship for her. And the Australian immigration laws are quite strong compared to here in the UK. Yeah. So in order for us to take that path, Alice would have to spend 2 years without working, where we'd have to live off my salary. Right. And she's a very independent person, and she's definitely not willing to do that. Of course. And then I was in a privileged position where I think 31 is the cutoff for your work visa here in the UK. Okay. And so I got to come across on a program where I had a work visa for 2 years, which I could then extend if I was in a relationship. Yeah. And so we registered our relationship in Australia, came across to the UK. And Alice being a sailor as well, can't really go anywhere else to set her life up. So that's how we ended up in Southampton. Right. Oh, wow. And then coming to the UK, we came across when COVID hit. Yep. So that was
that was interesting to say the least. Everything's closed down.
But it was slightly less tight here than it was in Australia, though. So I feel like even though it was difficult for you having to move over here, the restrictions over here got loosened a lot quicker, didn't they?
100%.
But then, over in Australia, it was really quick and instant, and then it was like a break of a few months where it was nothing, and then suddenly on again, and it was quite on and off again. Whereas here, it was like, let's do nothing for the most of the time, and then suddenly lightly implement a few laws. And
do everything, yeah. So when I came across, and I had booked my flights, we didn't have the blacklists or the restrictions on. We were speaking about it, and I had booked my ticket months in advance.
Yeah.
So then we blacklisted all countries that had cases of COVID, and we were shutting down the state once we would have 4 cases. So if 4 people had COVID, we'd shut down the state completely. And that's no travel. We did postcode lockdowns, which the UK did similar. And then you weren't allowed to travel unless you were unemployed, bankrupt, like you weren't allowed to have savings. If you had savings, you had to spend it in a hotel to stay.
Right.
And then once you had nothing, then you're allowed to leave the country.
Okay.
So to qualify for approval to leave as planned, visa's already paid for, everything's all organized. I had to terminate my lease without the approval to fly, make myself homeless, sell off all my stuff, get rid of all my money and my savings and everything.
Wow.
And then present myself as someone in a financially vulnerable situation that would then, and again, you could have a moralistic problem with that, which I understand, but people are either accidentally in their situations or they're deliberately in their situations. This was an instance where I deliberately put myself in that situation. And there was one gentleman who was doing the approvals for flights, and that approval would only be given to you in the airport once they validated all your documentation.
Oh my God.
So there's no, you just had to commit to it 100%. And I'm like, okay, there's only 1 or 2 times in your life where you're willing to just uproot your life, set fire to everything, and just be like, okay, cool, I'm hoping for the best here.
Yeah.
And when I got to the airport, I got there 6 hours early. The gentleman who does the approvals wasn't there, didn't start his shift until an hour before my flight.
Right.
No one knew this.
Oh, God.
And so I went around introducing myself to all the Border Force agents in the airport, and pretty much every hour on the hour as my watch would tick over, I'd go hassle the Border Force agents. Hey, I need my approval. And basically everyone got the shits with me in the airport. Just that stare for hours and hours upon end, waiting for them to come up to me to give me some information.
Yeah.
And just again, like clockwork, going up and saying, "Hey, you've not signed off. What do I need to do?" "Oh, we don't know yet." And then Canberra would do the pre-approvals, so I had to phone Canberra. Anyway, long story short, 20 minutes after the boarding of my flight, the gentleman came in to start his shift.
Wow.
And all he had to do with a purple pen was sign my form to say approved. That was the approval. It was a purple pen. And so here I've got couples next to me and people wanting to get on the same flight. They're in tears. Their life's over. They're not going to see their family. And I'm just trying to keep my composure. And then obviously having Alice on the phone the other end, "Oh, did you get through?" I'm just like, "Hey, leave me alone. I'll either get there or not. I'll let you know when I get there or not. Don't add to my stress, please." But yeah, so I got my purple signature and I managed to get on the plane, luckily. And the highlight actually was there was this couple that were from Europe somewhere, and they were having a really traumatic time of it all. Like they were struggling with their paperwork, and both of them were in tears the entire time. And then probably another half hour, 40 minutes after I had boarded the plane, they eventually got on as well.
Right.
So they got their approval too, which was quite nice.
Oh, that's sweet.
And then coming to the UK, it was almost like one of those apocalypse movies. So I landed in the airport. No one's there.
Which airport was this, do you remember?
Heathrow.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So landed in Heathrow, no security, no staff members for the airport. It is literally just us walking out of the plane, trying to stumble our way down to baggage claim.
4 a.m. or something?
No, it was 11 a.m.
Oh.
So you guys had gone into lockdown. Like it was...
Right, I see.
Yeah, and your trains were completely empty. There was no one on the train platform. I could have pulled out my phone and navigated, but I was just kind of looking around.
Yeah.
And the only 2 people I saw were 2 police officers. And there's a blacklist on Australians coming to the country. You're not allowed. My only approval to be in the UK is this photographed bit of paper with a purple pen with a gentleman's signature from Australia, and the UK don't know whose signature that is. So I'm a little hesitant and a little stressed still, even though I've been approved. It's not really an approval, and it's not going to hold up And so I was just terrified they were going to turn around and take me back to the airport and say, okay, you need to go home.
Yeah.
My response would have been, I don't have a home to go for. Here's all my paperwork.
Yeah.
And then I would have tried to convince them otherwise. But luckily enough, the police were super friendly. They helped me to the train station. And yeah, again, I did not see anyone. It was just me on the train.
Wow.
After the passengers had gone. It was completely empty on the tube. And the next person I saw was Alice in Tunbridge Wells, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
And we had spent probably 3 months apart because she came across earlier. So it was absolutely terrifying coming across because, the whole time it was up in the air.
Yeah, you could have got there and she could have just been not interested, and then
I could have gone through all that, and then she's like, "Oh, by the way, have you met Tim?"
Yeah. Oh yeah, like a week when I got back, like I just hooked back up with Tim. Yeah, you remember Tim, don't you? What? Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so that was really cool. And then I lived with Alice's mum for a year, which is always fun. The first time you're living with your partner together in your own house, it's not your own house, it's her mother's house, is a very interesting dynamic to juggle.
Oh, I can imagine. Even in any situation which, even like now, if either my mum or Megan's mum had to live with us for some reason, like we love our mums to pieces, but it would be difficult. It's just one of those dynamics that it becomes strange when you add that kind of layer, and especially if you're in their house as well.
Mate, yeah.
Yeah, that's mental. But you came to the UK during COVID, the most exciting time in UK history.
Yep. And then
you've been here since the country has been sort of limping its way forward.
Yeah,
since you came in, and then the country started to limp.
It's just gone shit.
It definitely wasn't Brexit and all that stuff before you came. It's definitely
it was me booking that flight. Once I did that, COVID started.
Yeah, everything was fine
continued.
Before then. Yeah. But how was your experience sort of adjusting to UK life?
It was super easy, to be honest, because that first year of UK life was just Alice and Sally.
Yeah.
Like, that was it. We were allowed out to exercise.
Very small percentage of the UK population.
Yeah, so we're allowed out to exercise. So, like, apart from the local shops and the household and going for a run in an area I don't know. So the UK, as far as I was concerned, existed in a 5-mile radius of where I ran, and that was the only places I knew for the first year.
Yeah, apart from the airport.
And the airport and the train line. Yeah, exactly. So very small world. And then to try and turn around and go, okay, this is not... no one can sustain that. Like, it's pretty rough to be locked in a house.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, even with your partners, like, you get a break from your partner with work, and you get to spend time with them, but you also have your own freedoms.
Yeah.
And to get to know someone so well and spend so much time with them and to allow each other to have your own lives while being together under the same roof, but also that person being your only contact.
Yeah.
So a lot to juggle. So our solution to that was, okay, while these lockdowns are happening, I think this was the second lockdown, it was like, okay, now that there's some leniency, do we want to go do something, like actually experience something? And at this time, even though there was people doing interviews for jobs, no one was hiring, because how do you train someone? This is before the work from home. Work from home wasn't an option. So we decided to go to Spain, and Alice is a sailor. And then so to partake in that and show an interest as well as an experience, because everyone loves sailing. Everyone wants to be on a boat.
Unless they get seasick.
Yes. So we went to Gibraltar and we did a sailing course, and I got my commercial license.
Nice.
And then when we came back, we went into a second lockdown, and our way of dealing with that was buying an old transit van and doing that up as like a weekender, because the lockdown had an exemption for people who had vans.
Yeah. So
we could do the South Coast while adhering to all the restrictions, while also only engaging with ourselves and the petrol pumps.
Yeah.
We could actually experience a bit of traveling. And that's pretty much what my experience of the UK was for the first year there. Yeah. And then I got my job at Market Study, which was back into the insurance, and they were the one of the quickest companies to start hiring. No, it wouldn't have been my choice, but it was what was there.
Yeah.
And then from Market Study, then Gallagher, which is where you and me met.
Woo. Yeah, and we've been working together for about a year.
Yeah.
A year or so. That's a fun story. My story of life is nowhere near that exciting, of moving around, doing all that crazy stuff. I've done a bit of travelling here and there, but not, go to a ghost city airport and be worried I'm going to be sent back to... How many hours is it? Like 24 hours we have to do a stop, so it's like 28 hours usually. So if you have a layover and they do an extended layover, like layovers are
traditionally, my
hours.
experience is like 6 to 12 to 18 hours. But I reckon the standard commute from Australia to the UK, you'd be looking at 32 to 36 hours.
Yeah.
With a break in between. And you're not sleeping. Like,
No, I can't sleep on setup very well at all. I have to be absolutely exhausted to do that.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's a long way across the water and foreign country, different people.
Yeah. At least they all speak the same language. Like, that's quite easy. Like from wherever, like if you went to anywhere in Asia, for example, where not only is it you can't understand what they're saying, but you look at the written down language and it's not even using the same. Even like, you know, you look at Russian language and that's Russia and Greece. They use the same alphabet. So you could look at that and you probably wouldn't even get less than 0.01% of it because it's actually a different alphabet. But when you look at certain Asian cultures such as China or Korea or Japan, and the writing in their standard format is pictograms. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it's like...
I know what you mean.
Little, and it's just like, and they symbolize certain things. And it's like, at least over here, it's like... very few, like, you can speak the language, you get everything that's going on, there's just a weird few quirks. Like, was there like one specific quirk of Britain that came out like when you first started interacting with the world post-COVID?
It was more of my quirks than your guys' quirks.
Okay,
so like if I would say words or use terminology that people weren't familiar with, I would just get like dead silence as a response. And when you experience that over and over again, you start to get self-doubt. You're like, am I speaking English? Is the problem me, or
we're trying to anglophile you?
Yeah, exactly.
Turn you more English.
Yeah.
Proper English. We kicked you and your ancestors out of our country, like, what, 200 years ago?
Yeah.
And then we're letting you back in. But you have to then adhere to our rules. We don't want to know what you learned over there.
No.
In that backwater world with kangaroos. Come back here and become like us.
Yeah. So it's just the normal things that people run into. So McDonald's is Macca's, service station, servo.
Yeah, I've not heard servo. I heard Macca's, not servo.
Yeah. And then obviously adding O's and A's.
O's is a funny one. When Australians, I've spoken to Goff about this a few times, of just adding O's, like when he said doco for the first time, and I was like, what? And documentary, doco. I was like, oh, I get it. But that makes sense. But sometimes you have words that are short and you make them longer by adding the O onto it. So it was, I can't think of an example. You've probably got one, but like, what? Just O's at the end. Do you know why it's O's? Theory?
I'd say it's the rhythm in the way that you speak. So I've heard people who try and nail down accents. I can't do accents for the life of me. They tend to speak in rhythms. So maybe the Australian accent has that rhythm. So they'll put fillers in to maintain the rhythm when they speak.
Yeah.
So when you get your single syllable words or like your abbreviations, and then you're adding an O, and it just makes no sense. It's probably just for the sound of it.
It's ironic because the Australians add vowels, whereas British people, especially when you go like more northern or more Scottish or even Irish, when you get certain, even Welsh, the different colloquial variants of, not colloquial, that makes it, that's downplaying the importance of the language. These entire dialects of variations of the English language, a lot of them are actually taking away vowels and consonants. They replace, apostrophes, obviously is what Shakespeare did years ago, but like when you write phonetically, how Scottish people, from like the point of view from like Irvine Welsh, author of Trainspotting, things like that, the words get shorter.
Yeah.
So you guys add letters and we take them away.
Yeah.
That's quite funny. I don't know why. I suppose the rhythm, as you say, probably makes sense. But like the different language variants of things cracks me up. And when there's certain sayings that don't make sense, they're the funniest ones.
Yeah. Andy, our boss at work, with his...
Gilding the lily?
Yeah, gilding the lily. It's like, where's that come from?
Yeah.
Like, mate, why?
Olden time speak. I've never heard gilding the lily.
Yeah. So yeah, you get those instances. They don't happen frequently enough for me to be able to recall them.
No.
But they happen, and they're so varied, but they're singular as well, and they just kind of naturally occur, and it's like, hang on.
Yeah.
Wait. But yeah, the biggest difference I've noticed between Australia and the UK is the lifestyles. And I don't think that's a culture thing. I think that's more of an environmental thing.
Yeah.
And that's like in Australia, we have more land, less people. People tend to have houses with backyards. They tend to have sheds. They tend to have a little bit more disposable income.
Yeah.
And so you'll find, like, my experience is that most Australians have interests and hobbies. Mm-hmm. And then those interests and hobbies are normally linked with, like, physical things. So whether it's an action, a sport, building something, creating something, where here in the UK, people tend to have you don't have the room to have a hobby. You don't have backyards. You don't have garages. You don't have sheds.
You don't have land.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
the main crux of it.
And the houses as well being built like within 2 feet of each other.
Yeah, if that, sometimes they're all just connected in one nice little row.
Yeah, and we are starting to do that back home in Australia as well. Like all the new developments are on top of each other. It's very similar, and that's another thing too. Your housing market, like so, if you look at houses, you don't list the land size on the property.
No.
So where in Australia, if you're buying a home, yes, you need to know how many bedrooms, but the most important thing is the footage. Like, you need to know how big your property is.
Yeah, we only give the footage of the actual property in a sense of like the house itself, not the land. It's never mentioned anywhere.
Yeah.
So they've just got, the gardens have got over X amount of square foot of space, but that could mean anything. It's ambiguous.
Exactly. So you can't even choose, like, if you wanted to pursue that, it's just so much friction to try and find a property like that.
Yeah, it's what happens when you've had like thousands of years of people building in the same areas just constantly. Whereas in Australia, it's like brand new. It's like the thing with America, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone's got so much land because there've only been people living there in the kind of modern way, that aren't indigenous people. People living there for, what, 200 odd years? If that. Whereas in England, it's been like, well, Shakespeare was 400 years ago and it was more civilized. There was civilization before him. So it's like double the longevity of America as a nation and Australia as a nation put together, minus from us, is when Shakespeare was about.
And that's the other difference as well. Your infrastructure lines are all still the same. Where in Australia, we do have the old lines, but because we're moving into new areas, we know what the projected growth is, those lines are more established when they're first put down.
Yeah.
So we then don't run into those bottlenecks. And technology as well. Like, it's unheard of to find a house that's more than 150, 200 years old in Australia.
Yeah.
Where here, you'd easily have houses from the 1800s that are still there, heritage listed. Sort of homes.
There's pubs and things like that. Yeah, there's a pub in town, 1600s.
Yeah. So none of that history is there in Australia. So I always find it difficult having those conversations about differences in culture because you think culture comes from the history and Australia doesn't have the history. And we're also like, it's a weird one. We're not too far away from like, we send all the convicts there to settle it. But we are far enough away that no one really associates with that anymore. It's more of just a running joke.
Oh, yeah.
Type deal. But the history's just not there.
What do they teach you in history class? Just world events?
Yeah, just like, it's kind of funny looking back at it, and I still have no idea what they would teach you guys in history. But our history class was like Captain Cook.
Oh, what, the settlers of Australia?
Yeah, right, and all the different like villages, the Queen's or the King's involvement in settling Australia, certain generals having their revolts
and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it was more Commonwealth, and because we're an island, so separated from everything else. Yeah, Australians really don't have a good history sort of education. When you get into high school, you can do electives, and that'd be the only way to get it. And we had modern history, which is like World War I, World War II, and we had ancient history, which is more like Egyptian times, 2,500 BC, or about Sparta, depending on your selectives. And that's pretty much just the extent of it.
Wow.
That's another thing too. Like, again, I'm not sure in the UK, English language, I imagine that literature would be a subject that's offered.
Yes, generally it's when I was at school, so this was 14 years ago now, but it was the top 2 classes in English language would then do English. They would try and cram all of the English language, the GCSE, into the first year, and then the second year would be English literature. Okay. Or was the other way around. But basically we did one GCSE a year, which is the qualification, instead of 1 over 2 years. So we did do English literature, but it was more higher ability. But I know a lot more schools nowadays do mixed ability, so I don't know how applicable that would be. So, but when I was, we did literature. But that was more analysing stuff. There's poetry. We did a bit of Shakespeare and stuff, but it was more about analysing language. Yeah,
so in school we did like the standard Shakespeare stuff, but like we never really learnt about writers. Our reading lists were more like little small novels and books that weren't very... Sorry?
Mice and Men, things like that?
I'm trying to think. Like... Harry Potter was part of our course. Okay, right. So we had to read a book and write an essay on Harry Potter, and I'm just trying to think back now. I can't believe it's been almost a decade since school.
There's over a decade.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
Over for both
well
of us.
Over, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what the other books we did.
Because ours was like, there was, of Mice and Men was the standard for us. Then obviously there was Shakespeare, but there wasn't good, interesting Shakespeare like Macbeth. It was the boring ones like King Lear.
Yeah.
Which can offend a lot of my Shakespeare fan listeners, but sorry.
And so that was another thing too. So 2008 was my graduating year, so it would be 2006, 2007. And so in our English classes, instead of reading the novels and the books, the syllabus allowed us to watch the films.
Yeah,
and so
we had that as well.
So the English teachers would show us the films, and then so we don't get appreciation for the text. We don't do the essay writing, and being critical of the text as well, or the film. It's like, what interpretations could you make rather than what is the actual interpretation of the film?
Yeah.
And that was kind of premise to learn. It's like, how many different ways could you take this rather than try and find the actual value in it? Which, again, was something I struggled with because it's kind of like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, that especially, like, I struggle with that kind of thing, language theory, and, like, it's a thing, as you say, like, because the film itself is an interpretation of... It's mainly the director's interpretation of a film. So that in itself is an interpretation, but, like, with Shakespeare...
Of an interpretation, which you're then interpreting. Yeah.
Exactly, it's an interpretationception, but... From people I know who like Shakespeare, I'm not the biggest fan of Shakespeare's work necessarily, but I've heard from a lot of people when you see it performed, it's way better. And I remember in primary school seeing Macbeth performed, and that was fantastic. Not by primary school kids, by actual actors who came in. I assume they're actors. Maybe they're just random people. Who knows? Hey, I was like 7. But watching Macbeth was really cool, and seeing certain Shakespeare performed is great. But I just find that at school, because it's trying to be one size fits all, it ends up just being, if you're even remotely above the average ability of that classroom, or if you have a non-neurotypical brain in any capacity, which is now most people as they're realising, but like, if you don't fit in these parameters, I would just get so bored of everything, because either in certain things like maths that I was naturally quite good at, I would just be able to do it instantly, and I'd be bored because everything would be going so slow for me. But other stuff like English language, they wouldn't try and make it sound interesting. It was almost like a chore to force you to pay attention. It's like, yeah, I know Shakespeare's boring too, I don't want to hear it again, but we'll get through it. And it's like,
rather than having enthusiasm in the subject and trying to like show a genuine interest.
Teachers, by the way, my teachers were great. It's just that was the vibe I was got. And like science in school, I couldn't stand, and then I finished school and I'm like really interested by it.
That's cool. My favorite teacher, I couldn't even tell you his name. I wish I remembered his name. He was our geography teacher.
Yeah.
And that I had no interest in geography whatsoever, but that became my favorite class.
Nice, yeah.
And same for everyone. And also our course marks for that class, everyone scored above 90%.
Wow.
And like throughout all my schooling, I'd never been put in an environment where that was the case.
Yeah.
And because he was also like, he had a personality. He could contend with all the kids acting up and in fun, humorous ways.
Yeah.
I remember we had one kid who was a bit of a... He would look for ways to disrupt the class.
Right.
He'd have underhanded insults, see what he could get away with. Testing the waters.
Yeah.
And that was our very first lesson of that year, and I'll never forget it. The teacher came up and he got the blackboard marker, and he walked up and he put a dot on the whiteboard. Oh, sorry, whiteboard marker. Put a dot on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
And he turned around and got the kid, and he's like, now listen, you've got some choices now. You can either leave the class, which I'm not having you back in this class again. You can either go to the principal's office, and we're not doing that. Like, basically, your parents are going to come in and we'll have a chat, and you're going to get kicked out of the class. Or you can stand up in front of the whiteboard. You're going to put your nose on that whiteboard for the next 20 minutes. If it moves from that spot, you will be going to detention for 4 weeks. And so now you have a choice. You've got the mouth. Can you back it up?
Yeah.
Are you going to take responsibility for it? And you're not going to disrupt my class. Like, he just made it abundantly clear. And I could not believe it. Yeah, the kid got up, put his nose on the whiteboard.
Wow.
And we would all then engage with the teacher because you knew where the line was.
Yeah.
And so we could have more fun. We could have more jokes. We could kind of push the barriers a little bit, but we all knew where the line was.
Yeah.
And just having that clear sort of experience, everyone paid more attention. It was more engaging. And he was a stickler, man. Like, even your notes in your notebook, if you didn't have the right color pen when you were transitioning on your headings, and you'd have to copy out his notes from the whiteboard as well. And if you were to do shorthand or anything like that, he would send the book back and you'd have to go do it again.
Wow.
So like super strict, but also one of the most rewarding classes. And he had a really playful, not really politically correct sort of personality.
I can imagine making a kid do that with a whiteboard.
Yeah, and he's just waiting for the kids to kind of contend with him, just so he had the opportunity to kind of like show them who's boss and also engage with them at the same time. And when he would do that, he was always forgiving. Like that kid he made stand up with his nose on the whiteboard, he then gave him multiple invitations to kind of engage with the class and have fun, and also allowed the kid's sense of humor too. It was pretty cool. And then you have other teachers where it's just screaming fits or just sending kids out, and there's really no progress and the kids aren't receptive, and it just kind of destroys the class because it just turns into chaos and then no one's getting a thing out of it.
And with Megan working in schools now, she has informed me that still goes on to a degree. There are some teachers, obviously I'm not going to name any indication to who they are, but there are certain teachers who just like shout or scream at the kids and can't get control, and it just becomes, for all the kids who kind of are somewhat interested, it just kind of spoils the experience for them. School is such a weird thing as a concept. It makes, like, in civilized society, it makes a lot of sense when everything was kind of stripped back, I think, back several centuries ago. Because when there was only, you basically you're a carpenter, or you're maybe a plumber going back 2 centuries, probably plumbing, because it was Romans kind of somewhat introduced that kind of concept, wasn't it? So, but still, it's like, certain jobs and things, a lot of them were manual laboury things. There was no tech, there was no technology, a few hundred years ago, it wasn't even electricity. So a lot of the jobs that you were taught in school was just kind of reading, writing, vague communication, and then go off and do the job. And then as societies become more complicated and we've had to start learning, trigonometry and advanced calculus for some unknown reason. As much as I like maths, I enjoy maths, okay, to clarify, and it is maths to you Americans who call it math. Do you guys call it math or maths?
It's math.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
You guys are so weird with your language because we sent you over there, but you've picked up so much from America. I know geographically you're closer to America, so that's probably part of it. Is I imagine there was some degree of migration from America. I
also think it's also the time at which we were settled and where we had the most of our growth. So as the Industrial Revolution took over, America bloomed, and then Australia mimicked that in the same way. Yeah. So a lot of the cultural moments, as well as the way the American family is kind of all been imported into Australia because that yielded the best results at the time. And so we've just kind of like mimicked that. And so a lot of Australians, we are more Americanized than some Americans, depending on which parts of America you go to.
Yeah, you're definitely more Americanized than the English are as well, which is a weird one. Because I don't think we perceive you as that. It's a weird one because I know Canada is a part of this, but if I just strip it back and make it really how a lot of English people view it, is there's the 3 main English countries or nations, and it's America, England, and Australia. They're the 3. I know obviously there's New Zealand, there's lots of other English-speaking places, but those are the 3. And it's weird because England, I think we feel like we're in the middle, because I think we feel like we're civilized, in air quotes, even though we're not, but we feel like we are, and the Americans are like super extroverted and 100% all the time, often too much. And then Australians are more kind of just chilled out and even perceived as potentially lazy, and that kind of, they're all chill. Americans are really, really, really intense, and Australians are super chill. We're kind of in the middle. We're kind of prim and proper, and it's like none of those things are actually necessarily accurate.
I think that's a weird thing. I think that's also a result of how quickly Australia's had to develop compared to all other countries. Yeah. So that's probably why it's like we don't. Historically, you haven't had time to get into an argument or have drama. Yeah. And because we're such like a growing nation, and most people were immigrants coming. Yeah.
You can live in the donut of Australia, and there's like spiders and snakes and all kinds and box jellyfish that want to kill you.
Crocodiles and sharks and all sorts. And, you've got freshwater sharks that can also swim out to the saltwater as well. So you just like, you'll see a shark in a river and you'll be like, what? How'd you get here?
River shark.
But yes, what was I saying?
Well, it was... So the difference is where Australia is perceived as maybe lazy because you're such a young nation as well.
Yeah, I think it's just because we can't be bothered, and that comes across as laziness.
I wonder if the heat doesn't help that. Like the heat of the... because you're in such a hotter climate. I mean, Australia is about the same size as the USA, interestingly enough, but where you're kind of a donut and... America, apart from there's like obviously Nevada desert and there's little places, but generally all of the USA is inhabitable. So it's like them making progress is easier because of the sheer amount of land there is to use to fertilize, the amount of people that were there, the surrounding nations. You know, you kind of had this thing, everyone from Europe was kind of going over there. Whereas to get to Australia was so much more difficult. It was kind of, here's a smaller amount of people with less attention to you. We're just going to leave you to it and you're all convicts by. Whereas America was like, let's push all that. It's the land of opportunity. We all kind of focus on that, where you guys were kind of in the corner, like, slowly building, and they were like, oh yeah, they're quite lazy because they haven't caught up with the rest of us, like, because all your efforts have been going into America, and then wars, lots of wars.
That was another thing too. I think Australian committed like a fair. We had so Australia forces, so like Army, Navy, things like that. The requirement to get in was that you had to be 6 foot.
Wow!
And this is back
the
then.
Original Tinder girl bio.
Yeah, exactly.
The original.
Yes.
Yeah.
So pretty much like, you know, all your A-class men are the people who are in the armies. So then we got a reputation when it comes to other countries in our armed forces because we were considered giants compared to everyone else. I have no idea what the average age was back then. The average height for a man back then. I
wonder if that affected the gene pool in any way.
That's the point. Yeah, it exactly did. So as a result of World War One, World War Two, or I think World War Two, we had the bigger involvement. I don't know if we had much in World War One. There were so many fatalities, and we sent so many forces across that the average height of people in Australia had dropped by a couple of inches. Like it wasn't a small portion; it was a considerable amount.
Yeah,
and so that's why now in European countries. You guys have a taller population than Australians.
Oh, wow.
Because of the losses we had. And it's quite cool when you look through history and stuff like that. So if there was the war in Vietnam, the same with like I want to say insurgents. That's not the right word.
The indigenous people?
No. So missions we would run into Japan. So
right.
They'd encounter the Australian forces, and then you've got these Asian people who are quite shorter, and then you've got these tall, white, pale, 6 foot guys that everyone like, holy shit, they're giants.
Yeah.
Little do they know that they've got trench foot, they're losing their toes, they can't survive the heat, the humidity is killing them. But the intimidation, I suppose, is there. But I think that's why we had so much involvement with all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
And then, obviously, it's something to be proud of if you've got a good armed force and there's some stories and you're getting some clout.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think one of the reasons that Britain still clings to the great part is because we did go around and colonise lots of the world, and then we just kind of steadily gave up.
Which is mind-blowing to consider how small the UK is and the fact that you guys had so much influence.
And we still have, I think, the world's greatest navy as well.
Yeah.
But I think by quite a lot. But obviously, we're an island, so it's like the only way we can even get anywhere is in boats.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it kind of started. You know, before technology was advanced enough for flight or anything like that, it was like, well, the best way is basically either on land or on ocean, and you literally can't get to England unless you go across the ocean.
Yeah.
So if we become the best ocean nation around, you can't touch us. So whenever there were big conflicts going on, you'd think that we'd win everything. But you look at the history of Britain, we were invaded and conquered constantly by the Saxons, by the Romans, by the reason that like so much of our language, and both like in Scotland and Ireland and Wales, why there's so many different dialects, why there's so many, the description I always use, which I didn't come up with this, which is English language is basically sneaking around in a crowded area full of Europeans and just picking out little bits and pieces like breadcrumbs out of everyone's pockets and kind of smushing it all together and eating it. That thing that you're eating, that weird Frankenstein bread that I'm imagining that would be horrendous and stale, that's the English language. There's no rules make any sense.
Yeah.
None of it's consistent with itself. And it's just that thing where I think we were conquered so many times. Even though modern sort of at a point we were then, no, we're going to go and conquer everyone else. We've been conquered by everyone. Now we're the ultimate conquerors. And then we went on and were quite successcal for a little while. And then I think we lost to America. And then from there it just kind of, we can't be bothered anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of like you guys got beat down so many times, learned all those lessons, and then went, okay, revenge, gonna go get it everywhere, conquer every country you possibly can.
Yep.
And then, as you said, America comes in, done.
And then we were like, we don't really need to conquer anymore.
But I still like how you guys still hold on to it. Like I learned since being here in the UK the past 2 years, it's still true today, the saying that the sun never sets on the Commonwealth. So like throughout the horizon, if you follow it around, there's a Commonwealth country across the globe.
Oh, wow.
And so all the Commonwealth countries still pay a Queen's tax. It's more of just a...
like a token thing, almost.
Yeah, like a token.
Like a nod. Thank you for vaguely saving our nation, even though the atrocities you've caused. But
yeah, and then so in Australia, that's another thing too. Every, say, 10 years or so, or 12 years, every 4 terms, there tends to be a discussion about seeking independence from the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
But also being part of the Commonwealth gives you so many more benefits as well. So it's just kind of like a toss-up.
So we really don't control Australia anymore, apart from there's a few little threads, isn't there? Like there's a couple of weird quirks, but as a general nation and how the majority of things run, we don't really touch it enough. So it's kind of like, well, you kind of are in control to a degree, and if World War III happened, you'd probably drag us in. But
yeah, the UK's intervened in Australia, I think, on 2 or 3 occasions.
Yeah, which isn't that much.
When they first settled it, there was a general who's just like, no, I've done all the work, I'm suffering, screw you, this is going to be my country.
Yeah.
And so he kind of set his own rule of law in. And then you guys sent your armed forces in to overturn the general, reestablish dominance, and be like, okay, cool, you guys, you're a bunch of criminals. We sent you here to suffer. We're not expecting you to build up. Go back, behave, take your punishment, take your licks.
Yeah.
And then I think, I don't know when it was. I want to say it was probably like somewhere between the 50s and the 90s in that 40-year period, we had a prime minister. And so the Queen has the ability, so she has to sign off on every legislation. So if we want to impose a law, we then have to file all the paperwork, send it over to you guys, and then get you guys to sign it, and it comes back, and then it's ratified, and that becomes part of our law.
Assumedly, British never vetoed.
Yeah, pretty much. And then the royal family also has, or whoever's the
Prime Minister?
Queen or King, the
monarch.
Whoever's the leader of
monarch.
The royal family, the monarch.
That would be it,
yeah. They also have the power to overthrow whoever's the sitting Prime Minister in Australia.
Yeah.
And they've used that power once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was against, but yeah, we had a Prime Minister that they pretty much sent him a letter to say, nope, sorry, you're fired. Run another vote. We're not happy with the way you're running the country.
I'd be so interested. Like, I'd love to be able to see... I know there's sci-fi that is kind of dabbled in these sort of ways, but, I'm lazy and haven't read every sci-fi novel. But, I'd love to experience or see a crystal ball, maybe a VR experience. Just go through and see what life would be like if the UK had never gone out and started conquering everyone. Like, how different things would be, because America would probably speak French, because there was the debate when we went over there, it was between French, Spanish and English. Then I think the shortlist was French and English. And obviously that's why in Canada there's French Canadians. Yeah. So the majority of America would actually be French. So therefore, the majority of the world's media output will probably be French. So I wonder if the French language would have overtaken the English language, because although Chinese Mandarin is the most spoken by individuals, English is the second or third language most commonly in the world. The most amount of places that have a portion of people speaking English fluently. So, and Spanish is like third, I think. Yeah. So it's like when you have, and obviously so much media is in English and like American culture and obviously Australian things as well. So and Australia obviously wouldn't be what it is. There'd be the indigenous folk that live there, but I don't know if there are enough of them to have built up enough of a population size, and how that would be in nowadays if no one had invaded and tried to take over, which assumably some people would have. Yeah, so people keep crediting Captain Cook as the person who found Australia and established the colony. There's historical maps where people have documented coming to Australia 4 or 5 separate occasions over hundreds of years prior. So if that was the theme or the consistency, I imagine there would be some other country that would have found Australia and settled it. And I honestly think it would happen the same way. The indigenous people would be pushed out. That's same as in America, isn't it?
Yeah, globally, that's
pretty much
everywhere.
Well, yeah, that's why colonization is just if there's some people who don't know anything outside of their world, they're generally peaceful folk, and then millions of people run in with guns or sharper sticks. There's not really much you can do, unfortunately. No, it's just kind of okay, this is your home. We have better use for your home. We can get more out of it, and that's for your benefit. So let's go take it. And we're more important than you. So goodbye. Yes, and it's that's unfortunately the way of the world with animals and with humans. Yeah. It's a weird thing. Also, I wonder how India and Asia would perceive England differently in the Western world, because it's weird because we haven't got a through line to India. If you look at where we colonised, it's not just we colonised everywhere from the UK to India. We did a few dots, but India's kind of nothing around it. We just kind of leapfrogged to across, India. Yeah. And we're taking this place. And I know there's reasoning why. There's a whole deep history of India's relationship with England as well as Pakistan and things like that. And one of the funny things with the English school system, which I find hilarious, is I remember being taught about Gandhi in secondary school. So I must have been 11 or 12, I think, before GCSE or formal qualification stuff. And so there's a few lessons on Gandhi. I think we watched part of the movie. And they were saying how good Gandhi was as a person. but they don't really tell you why. And then you look into it, it's like, oh, he was fighting the oppressors. It's like, oh, that's great. You know, we want like fighting oppression. You know, damn those fascists. World War II. That's the thing that English people love holding on to. And then it's like, okay, well, who was he fighting? It's like, oh, us. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. So in school, you teach people that Gandhi is a good person, even though, I mean, you know, he did do some dodgy things, but as a whole, as a political figure, he was a positive force for India. And you go, okay, but we were the bad guys there. But they don't really delve into all the bad stuff we did. They were just like, oh, but Gandhi was great, wasn't he? Because of us, you know, we caused Gandhi. So Gandhi wouldn't be about it for us. Like, yeah, but you literally caused genocide. It's like, no, don't worry about all the genocide England's caused. Don't worry about all that.
Don't take responsibility for the wrongdoings, but celebrate the victors.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I destroyed like these 20 huge buildings, and what'd you get out of it? This nice little diamond. Just look at this. Look at this diamond. It's great. And it's like, but what about all that? No, don't just focus on this tiny little thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, the history of Australia is interesting because I know so little about it.
Yeah.
So little.
Well, there's not much to know. Like, it's 200 years. That's it.
No, but you think about America, like the amount of civil wars they had and the amount of involvement they had with things as well. Like, America has a rich history.
Yeah.
You know, especially with the involvement of like the slave trade and things like that. Like, and also because because the United States is connected with Canada, which hasn't really been in the dramatic news, but more the southern American states and things, there's obviously a lot of conflicts between those, you know, the people there, and obviously a lot of people down there speak different languages to other nations, so there's a whole amount of tension in different ways to the whole of the North and South America. Which
makes an amazing story, which is why everyone knows so much about American history.
Yeah.
But you move to Australia, there's just no story there. So people don't know. It's 200 years.
It's like you even have like, you've got, oh my God, you've got like the most dangerous wildlife out there. It's like, yeah, but they don't really kill anyone because we've just got all the anti-venom. So it's like, yeah, it may be one of the most dangerous places on Earth on paper, but you're more likely to die from a spider bite in the UK than in Australia.
Yeah.
Because all of the dangerous spiders, you've got the anti-venom, whereas if one of the false widows over here bites you and you have a bad reaction, there is a degree of anti-venom over here, but it's mainly for, you know, like adders and things like that, snakes that are indigenous.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the funny thing with the takeaways from Australia. So like I think the brown snake's one of the top 2 or 3 snakes for most venomous, most poisonous. They're also one of the most common snakes in Australia, and no one thinks anything of them. And the reason is because even though they've got like a really strong venom, small amount kill you pretty much instantly, apparently their jaws, their fangs are so thin that if you're just wearing like a cotton shirt, chances are they'll grab the shirt and not actually pierce your skin.
Oh, wow.
So there's just not many fatalities. And then most of the other venomous snakes are just heart attack, I guess.
Yeah.
Panic, like whatever sort of venom that they ingest. The one that always freaks me out is the white-tailed spider. Apparently that's like a flesh dissolving and rotting. It causes necrosis when they bite you.
Yeah.
And they have to actually cut out chunks of your skin where you get bitten.
It decays, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's a wasp that stings, and it turns, and I think a certain snake where it clots your blood so much, your blood becomes like jelly.
Yeah.
So all of it just literally, all your veins and everything just block themselves up, and all your organs just shut down because all your blood becomes no longer liquid. It's like, oh, that's horrendous.
Couldn't do that.
But it's like with spiders. I remember a while ago, so the statistic may be outdated, but it was something like no one in Australia had died solely from a spider bite since the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Apart from the most common way to die in Australia via a spider is if you're driving and you pull down the sun visor thing, often spiders hide there and fall on people while driving, and that causes them to crash. And that kills more people than spiders
themselves. Yeah,
which is insane to me. That's such a cool little. Yeah. It's like vending machines kill more people a year than sharks do, and things like that.
And that's another thing too. So you do experience spiders quite a lot. They're around. They're prevalent. We have a lot of non-venomous spiders as well that are around. Your garden spiders, the huntsmans.
Jumping spiders aren't venomous, are they?
Sorry,
the jumping spiders.
Yeah, no, the huntsmans. Yeah. So they're one of the they are the fastest reflex spiders. So there's no way you can catch them because they're just going to outstep you every time.
Yeah.
So they make great YouTube videos where people are trying to catch them with an ice cream container or a bucket. There's no way you're getting that bucket over the spider. He's going to see you coming and he'll be out of there before you know it. If not, he'll jump on you. But huntsmans, they move around a lot. They like cool environments, so they'll tend to come inside your house. They can get quite large. They can be as big as your hand, like the span from leg to leg.
Yeah.
and yeah, motorcycle helmet, motorcycle boots, and they can flatten themselves out, so they'll sit between panels. So occasionally you'll be driving and your rearview mirror, you'll be looking at the cars behind you, and then suddenly you'll see like this little brown sliver on the side, and then he'll come out with a couple legs, and you're like, shit, there's a spider there. You don't know what to do in those situations. How do you get him out? Like, you haven't got a hose on you, and if you wet him, you're just going to piss him off. And you don't really know what type of spider it is until he comes out. Yeah. The worst experience I've had was I had a huntsman inside my helmet, on my motorcycle helmet.
Oh, my God.
And I had put my helmet on, and the helmet has an insert in the top where there's a visor, sunglasses that come down. Sunglasses that come down. And the spider was there. So he was fine. He was happy. I was happy. I was on my way to work. And then sunrise has come up, and it's getting a bit blurry or glary. God. Hit the visor button. Visor comes down. And suddenly I feel this like pattering of spider feet across my cheek. God. And he doesn't want to leave. Like I'm doing 60 kilometers or what's that, like 40 miles an hour on a motorcycle. He doesn't want to leave. He doesn't want to get thrown out. He's going to be looking for somewhere to kind of hide again.
Oh, God, no.
And it's like, what do? You can't do anything. So you have to like literally self-control. It's like, okay, there's a spider on my face. There's a spider on my face. Find a place to pull over. Don't get run over. Don't fall off my fucking bike. This is going to... Yeah. So I can definitely understand how people would crash and die. And I've only had that experience once, thank God. And
did you just stop the accelerator good there and kind of shake it? It was all right?
Well, see, the thing is, you can't take your helmet off quickly. Like, now they've got these little plastic clips, but like 10 years ago, they had D-rings. Right. So you'd have to feed your strap through to get it off. And so you're pretty much slapping yourself in the face trying to get it off, like whacking. And everyone knows what's going on too. You pull over the side of the road, jump out of your car screaming, and then you've got your arms wailing all about trying to swat shit away. Everyone's having a good time but you.
Yeah. It's either it's a bug in your suit. That's normally like a wasp or something, or a spider. Yeah.
And then snakes is another thing too. Like,
dogs is the issue, isn't it? Quite a few dogs and animals get killed by snakes and indigenous bugs or insects.
Yeah, so red belly black snakes and the brown snakes, the dogs will tend to antagonize the snakes, which is why they get bitten. Snakes don't attack dogs, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
But yeah, during the summer, we used to get snakes that come in the garage. The dog's barking for like a week straight. Everyone's getting pissed off. And then so I'll never forget Dad getting up. He's like, where's my shovel? I need the square shovel. And he'd go out there with his boots on and be kicking the stuff in the garage around looking for the snake, and then chop his head off with the shovel, put him in a bag, and then that would be done. The dog would be happy again.
Wow.
And so that was kind of like a yearly occurrence every summer.
Right.
And he'd get like maybe 3 or 4 throughout the season.
Wow.
And this isn't like anywhere out west, like where there's farms and rural areas. This is like suburbs. So somehow there's enough like mice and small rodents that they're living, and yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to ask as well, because we've been checking for about an hour, and there's only one real area I've not touched upon with, well, it's kind of two, but somewhat twofold, is food.